My name is Paul Meshanko. I am the founder and CEO of Legacy Business Cultures and the author of The Respect Effect, using the science of neuroleadership to inspire a more loyal and productive workplace. We are gathered today with some exceptionally bright minds to talk about three events that have affected all of us or impacted all of us emotionally at some point over the past couple weeks. Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Amy Cooper. What do those all have in common? They represent different people who were affected in some way by racism or who directly affected racism. What I'm going to be doing is introducing my co-panelists today. We're going to be exploring all of these situations. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Helen Holton. Dr. Helen is a 21-year veteran of the Baltimore City Council as a Gallup certified strengths coach and trainer. She speaks on strengths, resilience, and leadership. Her expertise resides in the intercultural perspective on local issues with global impact, focused on the intersection of race, gender, political power, and privilege. And I'll give contact information on everybody at the end of our session. Also joining us is McCraw. Vic is a law enforcement expert, consultant, instructional designer, and trainer with over 32 years of experience. He is a former state police training commander, police academy executive officer, state director of peace officer standards and training. Vic is the owner and principal consultant of Green Knight Consulting, LLC. And also, thank you for joining us, Vic. And then also Amos White. Amos is a haiku poet, author, producer, environmentalist, and civil rights activist, recognized for his vivid literary imagery and breathless poetic interpretations, published in national and international reviews and anthologies. Amos is also the founder and CEO of 100,000 Trees for Humanity, a community organizer with the ACLU People Power Alameda, the Alameda All Faiths Coalition, a steering committee member with CASA, the Community Action for Sustainable Alameda, as chair of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Committee, amongst many other titles and roles. Also, I want to give a quick shout out to our technical support folks. Brianna Jenkins, who is a native New Yorker who began as an intern with us 2 years ago. She's a senior at Binghamton University, political science major, and a social media maven. Kind of like that, social media maven. Also helping us in the background is Charlie. Charlie, thank you so much. Okay, let's start off with the events in an initial response to what has happened in our society, particularly in the United States, over the past month. Maybe Dr. Helen, care to start us off?
Oh, okay, lovely. So what's been going on? I mean, everyone knows we're living in a global pandemic, the most significant paradigm shift of this century. What does that mean for us? What does it mean with the series of events that have rapidly been changing how we know life to be globally? And so when you think about the intersections of where we're finding ourselves and really what brought us to this place, it was the racial divide that seems to be polarizing our nation in a way far greater than what we've seen of late. Police brutality, lack of community cohesiveness, and just really the divide between where we are and where we could be with the different construct. So as we go on in this conversation, what I love about what has happened is that it's given us an opportunity to change, to be better than who we are, to be more of a united community, and to get so much more accomplished.
Thank you. Vic, as a former law enforcement professional, the three examples that I gave earlier all involved law enforcement at one end of the interaction. In the Ahmaud Arbery situation, obviously we had a retired police officer who took it upon himself to literally, under the auspices of a citizen's arrest, track down and in broad daylight shoot with his son, an unarmed black man. We have Amy Cooper, a white female who called the New York Police Department, basically saying she was being threatened by a black man. And then finally, everybody in the entire world is talking about George Floyd, who in a moment that can only be described as inhuman, was knelt on like a farm animal until he literally died in front of everybody who was present. Law enforcement was a part of all of those. What's your take?
And law enforcement has always been a part of just about everything in our culture. The unfortunate history of law enforcement was that what used to be called slave patrols, keeping minorities and slave populations in line or in check by means of legislation. Everything that they did was legal. Those entities ended up being police agencies in the South and ended up being the basis for police agencies across the nation. And it wasn't until recent decades that we really started to get rid of some of these laws and some of these rules. However, it's been a difficult change. So Ahmaud Arbor, you have a local police department that abdicated their duties by telling a homeowner to call a neighbor instead of them in case of trespassers. First mistake. He's a retired police officer, giving him benefit of the doubt. Hopefully he knows what he's doing. Hopefully he's not going to do what he and his son did. And I say hopefully because we know that it occurred. So it's incumbent upon the police agency to do their job in that case. And this is a statement that I've made, and I'll be short. Police should not be used as a buffer against or a catalyst for social change. As soon as we do that, we're in trouble. Because Amy Cooper used the police in the way that she did, and that she thought that she could, and that she tried to, luckily it didn't happen, is an instance of police being used to enforce social change or to a buffer against social change. In this case, diversity within the community. And there will be enough talk about George Floyd during this conversation, and it pains me as a former police officer, state police officer, and training director to see that happen.
Thank you. And for full disclosure, I want to bring in Amos White at this point. I had a pretty good knack for identifying and hanging out with really smart people ever since I was about 10, which is about when I met Amos White. Amos is incredibly gifted professional in so many different domains, but particularly I think for our conversation today, Amos, I'm really interested in the activism that you have been a part of in California, and particularly in the Bay Area. This, I'm certain, has been a part of everybody's, not everybody, but the majority of people's dialogue for a while now. Give us your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much nailed it, and thanks. We have known each other a very long time, although we haven't been in touch for as many years as we knew each other, I would say. But I appreciate you holding space for this and for putting this out here and pulling us together so that we could talk about this, Paul. Here in California, I mean, I live on a small island right up against the place where the Black Panthers were born in the 60s in Oakland, California. I live in Alameda, California. And here in the Bay Area, from San Francisco to Oakland, Berkeley, or even here in our own hometown, where we most recently, 2 days before George Floyd was murdered by those police officers, 2 days before that, we had our own incident, which completely had gone unnoticed, as it was not publicized by our police department nor our city administration. Excuse me, people just found out about it only 5 days ago online, and it just went viral here, where a young man was literally exercising in front of his own house, where he does probably some form of capoeira or some form of exercise in the street, and someone decided to call the police on him. Now, he's done this every day in front of his house, and someone decides to call the police on him, and this is 2 days, mind you, before George Floyd. And so the tensions weren't even there. And in a town as small as ours of 78,000 people, we really did not see or think that this would have some impact in terms of being a racial incident. But it was. For 2 hours, they handcuffed him for no reason. They showed up, began to question him, decided they needed to handcuff him, as now in the police report said, he was resisting arrest. For what? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered here. They threw him to the ground. He was injured. They handcuffed him, and for 2 hours, they humiliated him in front of his house in this way. And because it was an unarmed black man, I don't even know why we're saying unarmed, why it has to be referenced whether he had a gun or not. The fact was he was a peaceful citizen and had been accosted. And these incidents are not isolated. These incidents have been going on for 401 years. We heard very articulately yesterday at George Floyd's memorial, Reverend Al Sharpton, again referencing the length of time that people really don't understand the Black community has been in struggle for freedom, fighting for justice, but aiming for freedom. And so we have been engaged in this, and we are organizing right now here locally, as much as we're joining in the protests, the national protests, first in support of our brothers and sisters in Minneapolis and for justice for George Floyd, but for Black people everywhere here across America.
And Amos, thank you so much. And I want to use something you just said as kind of a pivot point. You know, there are two things that, for those of you who have logged in to join us, there are two things that I would like to make sure that we cover as we go through our program today. That is, number one, what is the impact and why should we care about the all people matter response to Black people matter? And number two, going forward, what can all people, but especially white people, do to make sure that we're not having a Groundhog Day moment 5 years from now because nothing has changed? And I want to make sure that we really talk about what goes on. It's wonderful that everybody is out protesting peacefully, hopefully, for change. But what about when the protests are gone? So I want to get all of our participants to contribute ideas for a sustainable effort towards change. With that, I think what I'd like to do is kind of also ask everybody who's in our viewing audience, please send us your questions, and we will be moderating. We'll take a break every few minutes if we can and answer some of your specific questions. But I want to go to Vic at this point. Vic, tell me from your perspective, what's wrong or right with All People Matter?
And I felt myself compelled to respond to a social media comment about this morning. And we're not saying that all lives don't matter. That's not something to say. We're saying that Black lives matter. All lives aren't being endangered and affected in the way that Black lives are by the things that we're talking about right now. Not everybody has a legacy in their family of being taken, bred like cattle, and used to build a nation, and then devalued and not allowed to share in the wealth and the authority by those who didn't do the work to build the nation. And we've gotten to this point where everybody's got issues. So, and we talk about privilege, and people say, I wasn't privileged. I grew up poor. I had a hard time growing up. Imagine how much harder it would have been if your skin was Black and you were denied even more opportunities than you were. That's the point that we're talking about. So it's not an either or. And when you bring up all lives matter, and I'll bring this up because I'm kind of the law enforcement expert here, blue lives matter. Blue lives absolutely matter. My life was in danger every day, whether I knew it or not, when I was in uniform for decades. And I loved it. Blue lives matter, absolutely, because I was in law enforcement for 32 years. But guess what? I've been Black for 57 years, and I'm going to be Black until the day that I die. So both those things are important. It's not an either or. It can be both. It should be both. And as long as we start arguing and trying to one-up each other in this argument about all lives, blue lives, Black lives, I don't think that we're going to get to where we need to be in this discussion to make the necessary improvements in our community.
So Paul, I'm going to jump in here because I love how polite we're being and how we're dancing and skirting around issues that are very real. They are not new issues. And every time I hear someone say, well, all lives matter, it diminishes, it disavows the intent of Black Lives Matter and why Black Lives Matter even came into being. So I'm very clear that all lives matter because life is precious, it's a gift. But the reality of taking focus off of Black Lives Matter, you know what? This is what I know. Until Black Lives Matter, no lives matter.
Thank you. Yeah.
Until Black Lives Matter, no lives matter. And what I know, Martin Luther King said it more than 50 years ago, that we're all in this together. And if COVID has shown us nothing else, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care. Black, blue, green, white, whatever you are. And so the reality is we've got to stop dancing around and skirting as if this is an issue we can just be polite and nice about, and it's going to get better. It's not going to get better. What I know is if we don't take this moment in time and space to evolve, we will repeat the same things we've been doing for 400 years. And the reality that we have to face is that there are white supremacist efforts, and I put it that way, because that's what they are. It is the systemic racism. It is the unconscious biases that we live with. It is why 3- and 4-year-old white children already have a mindset that they're better than Black and brown children. Where does that come from? It comes from when you turn on the TV. It comes from, I saw a promotion, I had to do this IT check about security and cybersecurity. And I'm writing a letter to the company because I was offended that when the example that they gave of someone bypassing the security sensor at the door with a white woman going in and a Black man grabbing the door to get in before it closed was offensive. And it takes us opening our mouths and speaking, because Dr. King said, it's not the evil people that we will remember over time, but it is the silence of our friends. And so if you're on this call, are you a part of the silent majority that's unwilling to take a stand that we might truly move towards social change in our nation?
Thank you, Helen. And I just saw a question that came in, and it said, the question was, sometimes how we respond to these situations, racism comes from our parents. Well, I would say that that's true for everybody everywhere. Our experiences dictate how we see everything that goes on around us. And so me as a white man versus you as a Black woman, we're going to have different experiences that shape how we interpret what goes on around us. I'd like maybe Amos, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you pick up from there? What do you think, the part of the country that you live in is a melting pot for so many different kinds of people. How have you witnessed the way that we're raised and the different backgrounds that we come from profoundly influenced how we respond to these situations?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's got a lens. You're right, Paul. And everybody's got a lens. Everybody's got their biases. It's not where we're raised. It's how we have either lived a life that has either through circumstance or serendipityness been a diverse life. As you point out, the Bay Area is a very diverse area and region, socioeconomically, in terms of we have technology. I mean, we have so many different things that impress and impact us. So many other different people we have to learn to communicate with and learn from, whether tacitly or if we put ourselves into situations where we have to, or where we come into an appreciation of different cultures, different styles, different languages, different approaches, different ideas. And we actually do come to value that diversity. We're not more different than you're not in Columbus anymore, but where you are in Annapolis, or when we did live in Columbus, Ohio, still one of the most progressive cities in America, Columbus, Ohio. And I want to salute the governor there, DeWine, for the work he's doing to actually get to the point, the trajectory of the point that you pointed out. How can we begin to come together? And I think we're a little bit far away to start that question, in so much as first we still have to, and with a nod to Dr. Holton, we still have to take on the structural racism. We have to undo what is here first before we have to reach across the aisle. I still believe we need to be holding constructive conversations with all people, so that we can begin to learn of these biases. But I don't think we're more privileged here in the Bay Area. We do struggle more. I think, I can't say that compared to anybody else. No, that's incorrect. We don't struggle more, but I notice we are having conversations where both white people are questioning their own whiteness out loud. My friends online, more so than I see friends in other parts of the country. They actually are looking at white as a construct, not as a race. And I think people should, we haven't had that brought into this conversation here as in this webinar, but for people listening who may not be exposed to that, even for me, it was a learning process. I didn't, study race politics or associate that element, and whether in soc class or otherwise. But race is a construct. Whiteness and white is a construct. It's not a race. Caucasian, I guess, would be the race. But get educated and put yourself into more diverse situations so that you could begin to have your own unlearning to begin to have these conversations with other people.
So I want to say this, Paul, I love, we came to this place because you called me up and said, I have this idea. And I thought it was great. You as a white man will never fully understand what it means for me as a woman of African descent in America, okay? Public education is not gonna focus or delve deeply into what that construct looks like and how it divides us and it doesn't unify us. Our families, yes, we are products of our parents, what we take on to believe. And it's not always that we're gonna willingly go out and seek to know better, that we might do better, particularly if we're already comfortable in the privilege that we enjoy. And so you opened up with the scenario of Amy in New York, who was walking through Central Park with her dog unleashed. And a Black man is running through the park and decides he wants to, hey, can you put your dog on a leash? And she immediately comes back with, I'm gonna call the police. Well, thank goodness for technology. When he took out the phone and recorded the exchange, she's the one that got arrested. She's the one that lost her job. Because what she was doing is perpetuating the very thing that we're talking about, that's what's wrong in America. And so as one of our participants said, yeah, I want to take a stand. I want to learn all that I can to end racial injustice. Thank you. Thank you. But how do we share with one another that we've got to incite that willingness in others to want to take a stand for something different? And where we find ourselves today is deeply entrenched in an incredible opportunity.
Right.
An opportunity.
Helen, I want to say two things. First of all, going back to what Amos said, Amos, I couldn't help but think of the old Star Wars movie in Yoda, where he kind of says, you first must, he's talking to Luke Skywalker, and he says, you must first unlearn what you have learned. And that is a challenge. Deconstructing our white identity is a challenge. And Helen, to your point, what Amy Cooper said was not just, I'm going to call the police. She said, I'm going to call the police and tell them I'm being threatened by an African-American male. That's what she actually said when they did the transcript. So she deliberately fell back on a stereotype that she thought would put him in his place. And thank God, our generation actually has iPhones to record what really happens, not what someone said happens, right? I want to take a pot. Go ahead.
Hold on.
Even in that place, let's be clear, because our justice system still does not necessarily accept the recordings of a citizen to say that this is right. And far too often, let's go to George Floyd, that the coroner's first report says, oh, he didn't die from asphyxiation. Maybe there was a substance in his system or his chronic health conditions. And now we're getting into that whole conversation about the social determinants of health. And we know the injustice there. And it took an independent coroner to look at the records to determine that this was murder, a depraved heart murder by those persons sworn to protect and serve. But who are they protecting and who are they serving?
Can we take a little pause right now? I'd like to actually go to Brianna, and I know I've seen a lot of questions pop up. Brianna, have any of the questions that you're taking in look like they would be a really good pivot from what we've talked about so far?
You guys have actually addressed all of the questions that have come in so far.
Okay, fantastic. Well, you know who we haven't heard from in a while is Vic. Okay, and being mindful of time, we are about at the halfway mark right now. And what I really wanted to do was I want to focus on the future, what we can do going forward. And Vic, so much of what we see, and what we have come to associate with racist behaviors somehow involves the police. You and I, you are a former police officer yourself. I have worked with a lot of different police departments around the country. There's a lot of awesome police officers and law enforcement professionals, period. What can all of us do to maybe, because one of the things we know from a neuroscientific perspective is that if I don't see you as part of my group, I may not defend you as I would my own, right? What can we do systemically to help us see law enforcement as a part of us and them see us as a part of them?
And Paul, you almost quoted Sir Robert Peel in the late 1800s, established the Metropolitan Police Department in London. He basically said that the police are the community and the community are the police. The police just happen to be those members of the community whose full-time job should be devoted to the well-being of the community, which is a responsibility of all community members anyway. It's inherent. And I don't know of a police curriculum talking about the history of law enforcement in any police academy that doesn't bring up Sir Robert Peel. Because that was the era of what we call modern policing. This is where we should be going. I don't think that we've ever gotten there, but that's where we should be going. So the mentality that you speak of, and I'll bring this up, and you know, I'm giving a gimme to anybody who intends to be a peace officer. You're probably going to encounter, if you go to a good police academy, you're going to encounter a scenario exactly like the George Floyd scenario. I administered that scenario in the academy. It was an officer planting drugs on a suspect, an officer using excessive force, or an officer stealing money from a crime scene. Those were the three things. You had to show up and immediately stop the action, meaning if you had to pull the officer off of the suspect physically. If you didn't, you failed the scenario. If you didn't stop the action immediately, you failed the scenario. Number two, you would fail the scenario if you didn't immediately report it to a supervisor on scene. Number three, if you didn't ensure that the supervisor took action and threatened to go over the supervisor's head to the lieutenant or whoever was above them and let them know that you're going to put this in your report, you're going to document your body camera footage, and if they aren't going to take action, you will take it up the chain of command to make sure it gets done. You do those three things, you pass the scenario. If you fail that scenario in the programs that I administer, failed that scenario twice, you're out of the academy.
And Vic,
you don't become certified.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that. Vic, from a community standpoint, thank you from a law enforcement standpoint for identifying inside the training scenarios what standards you would hold and how you've been trained to enforce those standards. But those standards aren't uniform across America in every training program, whether it's for security agents who end up becoming literally security officials that you see at like malls and at banks versus those that are trained in a police academy or other. Those may be paramilitary trained in our National Guard or armed forces. So there is a training element to that in standard that we need to be looking at. I do want to point to, as we were looking at this as ACLU people power, there's a set of standards and policies that we want community members to know of and should also go through in terms of a checklist of what to look for in your police department or in your law enforcement entities in your communities, and how you should be engaged in that. We, the community, are not the enemy, and law enforcement doesn't see community as that. But the question that that Paul begs is, how can we begin to see each other with some form of humanity? And I think we need to acknowledge that takes empathy, and that takes empathy on both parties. I don't think that the community doesn't see their members who they do know in their police departments, who may know by name or have members who are in those police departments or sheriff's departments or other municipal law enforcement entities. But the question is, what is the training and what are the policies there, and then who's in charge? And then how can that be a better system? I want to reference Obama's mayor's pledge that he most recently issued. And it's very consistent with ACLU's people power policies that they had us and still have us work with our police departments with. And just 4 points. The first is to review your police use of force policies. Review your police use of force policies. The second is to engage your communities by including a diverse range of input. Hold a town hall on police violence. Hold a town hall on, if you don't have police violence or you haven't seen any in your communities, what can a community do? You can hold a town hall to raise the question, what is policing in today, or what needs to be policing in the future? Do we need a police department? Has anybody seen the report as of yesterday I saw, where the Minneapolis City Council now has raised the question and is exploring about disbanding their police department? It's not radical. The question is, where else might those funds actually create public safety, whether it's in food programs for most vulnerable members, or whether it's in housing, or whether it's in jobs, or more so in mental health and healthcare? How else might we rethink public safety and as a community come together and create jobs and create opportunities? That's where I really think we're going to find that area of common ground that you're really seeking and asking us to look to. We need a reimagining of safety, public safety for the future, and how we can better get there together. And you should look at the rest. The other two, I should leave us with points of the Obama mayor's pledge were, the first was review your police use of force, engage your communities. And as I mentioned, the third is to report back your findings. Once you hold your town hall, or if you have community listening sessions that we've had here in Alameda, California, report the findings back to the public of what the community has said. And then reform your community's police policy. You have to stay in the game as a community. Work with your police department, work with your mayor or your council, or whatever the name of your governing bodies are. But as a community, because they represent the community. The community needs to be at the table and the one speaking. Those are your representatives. But together you can reform your community's police use of force policies and ask these questions, or reimagine your own sense of safety with your own community and city council budgets.
Sure. Thank you, Amos. We got to have a couple questions. I will circle back. There's a couple other issues around policing and our involvement with policing that I want to tap. We had a couple really good questions in. and Dr. Helen. One of them was specifically about you. You are obviously a woman of passion, and as long as I've known you, when something's on your mind, you have no problem sharing that. And one of the questions that came in is, how do you display Dr. Helen's passion as an African-American woman to your organization as a leader without being portrayed as an angry Black woman?
So that's a very interesting point. I will say about 10 years or so ago, I met a woman, a Black woman, whose doctoral work was on the angry Black woman. And it is a very real phenomena in our society. And basically what her body of knowledge boiled down to is that the darker the hue of the skin, the larger the physique of the woman, the more that white people fear her, see her as angry. And so whatever comes out of her mouth is that, the angry Black woman. Well, it's a very real thought. And I'm gonna, Paul, our conversations really around neuroscience and the way that we interpret through our individual lenses and what shapes us. When you develop that mindset that every Black woman you see is an angry Black woman, especially if she's passionate about what she has to say, we shut down much of the message that's being said and we focus on the messenger. Right. And we immediately in our mind discount the message being shared. And so you have to, number one, acknowledge that. And these are unconscious responses that we do that have been ingrained in our brains to perceive them that way. And so like anything else, you have to systematically untrain your brain to create new patterns of thought that the mind will go under. So in the work that I do, Paul and I, around cultural competency, it's about looking at the 5 stages of competency. And so I want to talk about a term that many people think is the happy, we're all in this together melting pot. Well, I don't want to live in a melting pot, because what a melting pot is, it dilutes the uniqueness of who I am. I am a woman of African descent, woman, Black, and I don't ever want that to be blended in. So I think of it as fondue. You put the chocolate or the cheese in the pot, and whatever kinds of cheese or chocolate you have, they all melt down into one liquid. And then we take whatever and dip it in. But think of that in terms of a salad. The more ingredients you put in it, the more the taste of it changes and can be enhanced. Yet those ingredients in the salad do not lose the integrity of what they are. And so whenever you think of a melting pot, that's not what the America that I choose to see and believe and support. Because what I know is that when we are inclusive in what we do, we have better outcomes of whatever the issue is that we're facing, that we're looking to address. And so I would challenge you to look at what allows us to adapt and not assimilate. Because assimilation is the lesser way to really bring about social change in our society and our communities. And so be proud of who you are, but understand, yes, we are all in this together, but I'm showing up as I am, you're showing up as you are. And learn to respect the differences and let that become the beginning of your conversation. A quick story. When I was in the 5th grade, I was the only Black child in the entire 5th grade. And in class one day, the conversation of hair. And, it was like, well, don't you wash your hair, shampoo your hair every day? Oh no, I can't shampoo my hair every day. And well, why not? Or wanting to touch my hair because it's different from your hair. Well, these are things amongst children, but they're also opportunities to develop an appreciation for our differences and that we all coexist together. And so in the way that we confront the situation, don't confront it with anger. And when someone comes at you and is passionate and they don't look like you, don't immediately assume that your life is threatened or that you're in, oh, oh, the conversation's getting dangerous, I better walk away from this now. Lean into it. Be curious about it. It's such an incredible opportunity to grow.
Helen, you just read my mind what I was thinking. In our Connecting with Respect workshop, we very carefully distinguish between tolerance versus respect. Tolerance being a neutral, almost inactive mode of interacting with people, but respect being a much more active process. But before we can actually get to this place called respect, what's almost required is to go back to a lens that children instinctively have coming out of the womb and until they're, at least in their teenagers, and that is a lens of curiosity with difference. As we get older, we stop being as curious, especially when we are around others who aren't like us. We start judging instead of trying to understand and explore. And I think that getting back to that place that you just talked about, where when we see somebody who talks differently, they dress differently, they look differently, they respond differently, rather than feeling so compelled to judge it as good, bad, better, worse, we want to understand it. And just through that engagement and trying to understand that, we actually get to this place called mutual respect. So thank you for bringing that up. Vic, you and I had a conversation earlier about different ways that we can actually get involved with police, with law enforcement officials in our communities. What would you suggest? What are some things that we can actually do to, yes, it's law enforcement, they take an oath to become and protect their citizenry, right? But let's just say that maybe not all of them are as intent or as equipped to do that. What can we as ordinary citizens do to put that bridge out there from our end?
And this goes to several of the questions that I see popping up in the chat window as well. And we want to bring in as many minds and people as we can. And the thing is, we talk about, the COVID response and was there a game plan? Well, we found out, there was a game plan. The experts knew where to go and that plan was somewhere, but nobody used it. Obama mentioned this the other day. The plan was created. It's the president's task force on 21st century policing. And there is a recommendation on how to implement that plan. And they came up with 5 different ways. There are 15 total, but 5 different ways for both local government, law enforcement, and communities to get involved. So the 5 things for the communities listed here, and I agree with each and every one of them, is first, engage the law enforcement. First of all, law enforcement are the people that raised their right hand and said they were going to serve the public. They didn't say, as long as you respect me. They didn't say, as long as you, obey the law, because if you're a criminal, all bets are off. None of that was in their oath. And they should be the ones closing the gap. But in those communities where they are not, the community should close the gap. Go and find out. Engage with local law enforcement. Participate in meetings, surveys, and other activities. Number 2, participate in problem-solving efforts to reduce crime. Neighborhood watch programs. Get to know who is your school resource officer at your kid's school. Get to talk to them. Introduce your child to them. Tell your child what your conduct expectations are at school, but not the bad officer is going to get you if you mess up kind of way. But also let that police officer know what your expectations are of their treatment of your child. Work with local law. Number 3 is work with local law enforcement to ensure crime-reducing resources and tactics are being deployed to mitigate unintended consequences. George Floyd is the ultimate unintended consequence. What are we doing? How are we doing it? Do we not? And I was going to bring my hobble in here. A hobble is a piece of police equipment that, if used properly in that circumstance, is going to let the officer disengage at least momentarily, gather themselves, take a deep breath, bring down the adrenaline level, and then re-engage, get him into the car. None of this would have happened. So what are we doing? Do we have funding? Do we have proper police equipment? Are we devoting our attention and resources where they need to be to maintain public safety? Number 4 is call on state legislators. And of course, if we don't have proper representation in government, those legislators aren't going to listen to us. So getting out and voting is a big thing. And number 5 is review school policies and practices and advocate for early intervention strategies. We most of us here talking about this, 10 years, 20 years down the line, we're going to be irrelevant to this conversation. But those who are going to be relevant, and one thing you, Paul, how do we keep from coming back to this as a Groundhog Day 5 years later? How do we keep coming back to it 10 and 20 years later? That starts with kids. It starts with the kids, how they perceive law enforcement, how they're treated by law enforcement today, what they see as acceptable conduct by law enforcement and conduct by citizens in their communities today. That's going to be the groundhog of 10 to 20 years from now. And if we don't address it now, we're going down a road that we're not going to be able to fix.
You know, Vic, I love what you're saying. And as a 21-year veteran of the Baltimore City Council, that 5 years ago when Freddie Gray died in police custody, I was a leader in Baltimore City. It was a very bittersweet experience because it revealed many things, just as these uprisings are doing today. And what you said, what I know is that all politics are local. How many people do you know, and just out of curiosity, and this is just a rhetorical question for you to consider for yourself. Do you know by name the persons that represent you at the local, state, and federal level? If you know your name, do you know who they are as people? Do you know the issues that they're committed to? These are the questions that we should be asking ourselves when we go vote. And voting is a right that many of us in this country do not have. So being actively involved in the restoration of voting rights of felons who have paid their debt to society, many of them Black and brown. The ACLU in 2018 did a study that African Americans represent 37% of the population, yet 67% of the incarcerated population. How does that happen? How does that happen? We've got to do better if we truly have any hope of being the United States of America, because there's so little about us that's united right now. And the divisive dogma that we hear every day on the TV, on the radio, oh, it's the Democrats, oh, it's the Republicans. Newsflash, it is the independents in our electorate that have no opportunity to participate in the primaries that are the determining factor of what happens in our general elections. The system of the Electoral College versus the popular vote. For 2 elections now, the candidate who got the most votes is not the one in charge to lead our nation. There's something broken in America, and it takes the groundswell from the ground up. There's not a piece of legislation that's introduced in Congress that did not emanate out of a local community and concerns of citizens that pressed and pressed and pressed. When are these protests going to end? I don't know, but there's an opportunity in it for each and every one of us, not to be the silent friend that keeps it on the inside, but to find ways to make it something that we connect with other like-minded individuals. I am so encouraged by the composition of the protesters, that it's not just Black people, it's not just men, it's not just young people, it's not just white people. It is a slice of America that wants something better. Our generation of young people today live in the face of more violence and divisiveness in America than ever before. And it's reflected in the current state of our economy, the inequities in our healthcare system, the failures in public education. When is enough going to be enough that we stand up and do something? And we're here today beginning a conversation that this is the first of many to come, because it is in the conversation that our true opportunities exist to be better than who we are, to move forward into a future, creating a legacy for a better United States.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that. It's, and I like what you said. Thank you, Dr. Holton. It's democracy in this country demand two things, the people and their engagement. It's the second part that makes things happen. The one thing that you nailed when you talked about the independence and that, as some people call it in statistics, that messy middle, that were disengaged in the last election or the last two cycles because they didn't feel represented or they felt turned off. A healthy democracy calls for you and everyone's participation. When I say you, I don't mean Dr. Holton. I'm talking to our participants out there. Every single American must participate. And another thing she said, there needs to be a ground swell. That comes from the grassroots. It comes from our neighborhoods. It comes from our communities. It starts in the household. I got two teens over here who were finally now asking me questions and starting to show up in their own forms of conscious participation and are willing to ask questions about the systems that they've always felt impressioning them, but have never really looked at them structurally, as you also pointed out. And so whether we're talking about our not law enforcement, but our police departments and how they police our communities, or in some cases over police our communities, or if we're talking about our schools, regardless of our institutions, it necessitates the community engagement. There's a young, or I can't say, I don't even know if they're young, I'm looking in the chat there, someone named Sam hollered out saying, you know, what can we do? Can't we ask our police departments to hold a meeting and introduce themselves? It's like, yes, you can. And yes, you should. You should also be going to your, just at least once a year, if not once or twice a year, go to your city council meeting just to understand what it means to be a participant, just in witnessing, just listening in the audience. You don't always have to stand up at the microphone, but put yourself in a situation, whether it's a board, a commission, or a committee, to actually get engaged in an institution, or even on your library board if you have one. But put yourself into a situation where you begin to become a participant in this democracy. We do have systems that need to be looked at vigorously. We're talking right now, what brought us together is the flashpoint and unfortunate death of George Floyd, of Ahmaud Arbery, of Breonna Taylor, of Tamir Rice. I could go back to Medgar Evers or Emmett Till. I mean, we've got history. We as Black Americans have history. We as Brown Americans have history. Our Native Americans are the original peoples here. With their genocide, it started. But we've got history, and the result of that, the trauma, to undo, and reparations to actually really start considering in terms of how we can begin to address these traumas, as we're talking here, systemically, in undoing systemic changes. But the only way forward, I believe, to echo what Dr. Holton was saying, is not only together, first in conversations like this one here, but more so in our communities with our own individual participation. Call for a town hall where you are, organize where you are, go to the ACLU People Powers website and see, and just get a list of what you can do, or just call for a town hall, bring people together across your communities, or check out Obama's Mayor's Pledge. It's online called, I think it's called the Obama Mayor's Pledge, of 4 things. It's very similar to the ACLU People Powers steps to creating change and holding your public officials accountable. And what that means is you create space for them and ask them questions on the issues that are impacting your communities. Right now, it's police violence or over-policing, or the systemic problems of incarceration that must be seriously looked at. But together, but first with ourselves in this conversation, we need to work together in our communities to call for change of these systems.
I'm ask this one question that I'd like everyone to think about. In this process of where we are you the chicken or the pig? The chicken participates and contributes. The pig is fully engaged and all in when you think about your breakfast.
Okay, very good. Well, listen, we are down to our final 3 minutes. So what I'd like to do is, we've had so many incredible comments, and we will stick around and answer as many of those as we can, but I want to give everybody on our panel a chance. And I'm going to call this the 60-second challenge. And what I'd like to do is, starting with Vic, I want you, in 1 minute, would you please give all of us, challenge us to do 1 or 2 things differently than we have been doing to improve the situation for all our entire society. What do you recommend?
Start difficult conversations. Talk to somebody you've never talked to before and ask them what they're thinking or feeling. More feeling. Don't ask for data. Ask for what's their emotion, and listen. Don't use as an opportunity to interject your point of view. Just learn as much as you can. Ask it of officers, ask it of friends, ask it of friends of friends, ask it of people you never met before. Just start conversations, and it's going to take, and these are hard conversations. We're not talking about, hey, how's the weather today? We're talking about, what's your view on so-and-so? I see some questions, and I know this is 60 seconds. I see some questions about, how do white people get involved? It's difficult to go up to a black person and say, hey, as a black person, what do you think about such and such? It's a difficult conversation. Make yourself vulnerable. Be authentic. I don't know because I don't have your background. Are you willing to share with me your thoughts and feelings on this? Perfect wording. Start the conversation.
Thank you, Vic. Amos.
You know, I would say I'll pick up where Vic left off. As I just posted before starting this webinar, what not to say, you know, dear white people, and I'll tell you, but dear white people, what not to say when, to your black friends or in asking a black person, and check out my wall on Facebook, but it's, people are well-meaning, and they are well-meaning and they intend to help, but they're struggling. And for black people listening, please know, when someone it seems to be authentic in asking that question, don't just jump and take it as they're gaslighting you. But technically, it's a form of gaslighting to ask questions in a certain way. It's incumbent upon you, turning back now to the white listeners, it's incumbent upon you, as Vic was saying, to do your work, to do the work of what you can do to educate yourself, to undo the systems of racism, even the way you approach or may form your questions as it is addressing white people. And in terms of that, I'll say White Fragility is a book. It's called White Fragility, a very good resource to read, to understand your whiteness and how it is impacting and or reinforcing the white supremacy that's been built into this country of ours and in all systems. I'd also recommend Toni Morrison's essays, Playing in the Dark, that you should check out. I would say for African Americans.
Amos,
sorry,
we're going to do it. We're going to. Several people have asked for some books, some reading that they could do, and I've already started to compile a list, and I think it'll be easier in the essence of time that we just compile a list and make it available.
Sure.
Good, we'll put it in the chat. And I would also say, folks, I mean, literally in the last 3 days, there's been this enlightenment with my white friends and that I see online as well. People are struggling to understand and to learn and to unlearn what they can't see, but they can feel, and they're hearing, they're present. And I would say, Google yourself books on anti-racism and on and White Fragility really is at the top of that. But thank you for saying we'll add a list in the chat maybe of those books?
Not in the chat. I don't type that much. We will certainly make one available post the session. It's a full day. My day's not ended. I have an extensive book list. And this is work I've been doing for decades.
Good.
I do
And I
work.
would say lastly, and I'll reiterate for every single person here, Black, white, Native, of Asian descent, whatever, get involved locally, organize locally, speak out locally. Also speak out on the federal, but do it local. Start with your local officials. Thank you, Paul's got that other book up there. But organize and hold a local forum. This is what democracy looks like. And when you put that in action across this country, we'll start to begin to look at these systems and to begin to hold our systems more accountable for the communities that we really do want to imagine for the future.
Excellent. Well, it is exactly 2:03, so we are wrapped up with our official time slot right now. What I would like to do is go back and thank everybody for their time and the preparation. We really pulled this together in record time to make this happen, and I hope those of you who have logged in to join us have gotten something significant from the content and from our conversation in different perspectives. What I think we're going to be doing is, my co-host and I agreed, we don't want this to be a one and done. We are going to probably do something at least once a month, if not more frequently, with not only our current panel, but some other folks that we can recruit along the way. And our goal, I think we're all equally committed to this, is to not let this be a point in time where we go back 5 years from now and say, yep, that was then, and we're still in the exact same place. If we're bright, if we're committed, if we're focused, and if we are willing to hold ourselves up to the bright light and say, what can I do differently? I think we actually have a chance to move the needle a little bit. So again, thank you to everybody. I want to kick it back to my other panelists. Any final thoughts to share before we log off?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. It has been very encouraging and helpful, as we did not know what today was going to look like. We certainly will be doing this, and monthly may be too far apart, but that's okay. If it's monthly, it is. Whatever it takes. But I think that the moment of action is now, and we must find our space, our place, our voice, and our will to be a part of it.
Wonderful. All right, everybody, thank you, and stay tuned. We will be making this session available as a recording on probably multiple channels. Helen will probably be posting on YouTube with tags to all of us, so stay tuned, and if you know anybody who missed it who you think would enjoy it, by all means, send the link once we post it out. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Well,
Thank you.